From the moment we are born, we are shaped by forces we do not see. We are wrapped in colors, handed toys, spoken to in different tones, and directed down paths long before we understand choice. Boys are told to be strong, not to cry. Girls are told to be kind, to look pretty. These are not random suggestions. They are social instructions, quietly repeated over and over until they become beliefs. And beliefs, once they settle deep enough, are mistaken for truth. This is how social conditioning works. Not with force, but with subtlety. Not with confrontation, but with repetition. A boy who falls and is told to get up, don't cry, learns quickly that vulnerability is weakness. A girl who tries to speak up and is told to calm down. Be nice begins to think. Her voice must be small to be accepted. These experiences aren't isolated. They are collective and generational, passed from parent to child, teacher to student, media to mind. Over time, these small differences become big divides. What starts as gentle nudging turns into invisible barriers, shaping how men and women think of themselves and each other. This is not about blaming one group or the other. It is about understanding that the gap we now see in careers, emotions, expectations, and relationships is not natural. It is conditioned. And like any form of conditioning, it can be unlearned. But first, it must be seen. To see it, we have to become quiet observers of our thoughts. We have to ask, where did this idea come from? Why do I think men must behave this way and women that way? What have I accepted as normal that might not be natural at all? Social conditioning works through symbols, language, rituals. A man who chooses compassion over dominance may be called weak. A woman who chooses ambition over nurturing may be called selfish. These judgments are not objective truths. They are social responses rooted in outdated norms. When enough people repeat them, they appear valid. But repetition does not equal truth. It only creates the illusion of truth. We often grow up believing that men are logical and women are emotional, that men lead and women follow, that men protect and women support. But these are roles created by culture, not biology. In fact, science shows us that both logic and emotion exist in every human being. Leadership and nurturing are not limited by gender. They are human capacities. Yet, social conditioning pushes us to suppress half of our nature. Men are discouraged from showing softness. Women are discouraged from showing strength. And when this happens, neither gender is whole. In relationships, this conditioning plays out in harmful ways. Men may feel pressure to always provide, even at the cost of their mental health. Women may feel pressure to always please, even at the cost of their authenticity. Expectations become burdens. And when two people enter a connection with these burdens on their backs, true intimacy becomes difficult. They don't meet as human beings, they meet as roles. And he, as roles, cannot love. Only people can. In workplaces, we see similar patterns. Men may rise faster, not because they are more capable, but because they are conditioned to compete. Women may hold back, not because they are less intelligent, but because they are conditioned to be cautious. The result is a gap, not in talent or value, but in opportunity and voice. This gap is not the fault of individuals. It is the outcome of systems built on social conditioning. And unless we question the foundation, the structure will remain the same. No matter how many times we repaint the walls, what is important to realize is that social conditioning is not inherently evil. It began as a way to create order, but when order becomes rigid, it turns into limitation. The rules we once followed to survive now prevent us from thriving. And the only way to break free is through awareness. Awareness begins when we pause, when we stop automatically repeating what we were taught and start observing with new eyes, when we notice how often we say, boys don't do that, or girls shouldn't behave like that, and ask why. It takes courage to challenge conditioning, because to do so means standing apart from the crowd. He means facing criticism, misunderstanding, even rejection. But it also means growth. It means becoming more fully human. A man who reclaims his right to cry reclaims his heart. A woman who reclaims her right to lead reclaims her power. And in doing so, they do not take from each other. They return to themselves. The gap between men and women, as we see it now, is not set in stone. It is carved by patterns, and patterns can be broken. But first, we must accept that we are not as free as we think, that many of our thoughts, actions, and feelings have been shaped by stories that are not our own, stories that were given to us, stories we never questioned. Once we begin to question them, something beautiful happens. We make space for truth, space for change, space for equality that is not forced but natural to bridge the gap between men and women. We must stop trying to affix each other and start seeing each other, truly seeing without the lens of stereotype, fear, or expectation. When we do, we discover that beneath the surface differences, we share far more than we imagine. We all want connection, safety, purpose. We all fear rejection, failure, loneliness. These are not male or female experiences. They are human ones. The real work lies not in making men more like women or women more like men. The real work is helping both return to their wholeness, because a whole man and a whole woman do not need to compete. They do not fear each other. They do not blame each other. They lift each other. And it's not out of duty, but out of understanding. And understanding is the antidote to division. Social conditioning may shape perception, but perception is not destiny. We can choose to see differently. We can choose to relate differently. And in doing so, we narrow the gap, not with force, not with anger, but with awareness, compassion, and truth. The kind of truth that frees, not divides. The kind of truth that brings us back to ourselves and closer to each other. From an early age, both boys and girls are taught how to express, or more often, how not to express their emotions. But the way these teachings are handed down is rarely the same. Boys are told to be tough, to hide their feelings, to never show fear or sadness. Girls, on the other hand, may be allowed to express certain emotions like sadness or compassion, but they are also warned against being too assertive, too angry, or too loud. Over time, these teachings solidify into rules, and these rules become cages. The result is that both men and women grow up emotionally unbalanced, not because they lack emotions, but because they have been conditioned to suppress the ones that don't fit their gender roles. Emotional suppression is not always visible. It hides behind behaviors that seem normal. A man might work endlessly, never acknowledging his burnout. A woman might smile constantly, even when she's deeply anxious. Neither may feel safe enough to be honest about their inner world. This isn't just an individual issue. It's a collective pattern. When society rewards silence, people become quiet. When society punishes vulnerability, people become numb. And when both men and women are emotionally disconnected from themselves, they grow emotionally disconnected from each other. The emotional gap between men and women doesn't happen suddenly. It widens slowly, like a crack in a wall that no one notices until it becomes structural. In relationships, this emotional disconnect leads to misunderstandings. A man may struggle to express what he feels because he was never taught the language of emotion. A woman may feel isolated because her emotional depth is dismissed as overreacting. Instead of meeting each other in truth, they begin to perform roles. They stop communicating from the heart and start managing impressions. This creates a deep sense of loneliness, even in relationships that appear fine from the outside. When men suppress emotions like sadness, vulnerability, or fear, they often replace them with emotions society accepts, such as anger or detachment. Anger becomes the only safe expression, even though it's rarely the root emotion. Likewise, When women are discouraged from showing frustration or ambition, they may internalize their stress or pretend to be content. When this leads to emotional fatigue, anxiety, and a quiet kind of suffering that wears people down over time. And because these patterns are so deeply normalized, they are rarely questioned. At the root of emotional suppression is fear of being judged, fear of being seen as weak, fear of not being accepted. For men, showing emotion is often wrongly associated with losing control or losing status. For women, showing too much emotion may be labeled as irrational or overly sensitive. These labels are not just unfair, they are harmful. They prevent people from being whole. And when individuals are not whole, relationships cannot thrive, families suffer, workplaces become cold, communities lack empathy. The ripple effect is wide. In friendships, emotional suppression means that conversations stay on the surface. People talk about tasks, schedules, distractions, but not about pain, dreams, doubts, or longings. This leads to isolation, even when we are constantly connected through phones and social media. What we are missing is not communication, but connection. Connection requires emotional honesty, and emotional honesty requires safety. When men and women do not feel safe to be emotionally real with each other, they create distance, they create masks, they create walls. This emotional divide also influences parenting. A father who never learned to talk about his feelings may struggle to connect with his children on an emotional level. A mother who has always been expected to manage everyone's emotions may burn out trying to hold everything together. The next generation then inherits the same emotional imbalances. Search cycle repeats, and with each generation, the gap quietly grows wider unless someone decides to stop and see the pattern. Healing begins with awareness. We must first see that emotional suppression is not a personal flaw, it's a social inheritance. It was passed down by people who didn't know better, people who were also trying to survive in a world that punished emotional openness. Once we realize this, we can stop blaming and start understanding. We can begin to unlearn. And unlearning does not mean rejecting who we are. It means returning to who we were before the world told us who we should be. The process is not easy. Reconnecting with suppressed emotions takes time and courage. It can be uncomfortable to cry for the first time in years. It can be strange to say, I feel afraidy, when you've always hidden your fear behind jokes or silence. But these small acts of emotional truth are powerful. They break the illusion of separation. They allow two people, whether partners, friends, or colleagues, to meet on real ground. On this ground, empathy grows. Understanding deepens, conflict reduces, trust increases. When men begin to feel safe expressing their softness, they do not become less masculine. They become more human. When women feel free to express their strength without fear of being judged, they do not become less feminine. They become more whole. Wholeness is not the absence of pain or confusion. It is the ability to hold both strength and vulnerability, logic and emotion, action and stillness. And when both men and women embrace this wholeness, they become more able to understand each other. Imagine a world where a man could say to his partner, I feel sad and I don't know how to fix it, without being seen as weak. Imagine a world where a woman could say, I am angry about this and I want to be heard, without being seen as emotional. In such a world, the space between people would shrink. Conversations would become real. Relationships would become healing rather than draining. This is not a fantasy. It is a possibility, but it begins with changing how we relate to our own emotions. We must also shift how we respond to others. When a man cries, don't look away. When a woman speaks her truth, don't dismiss it. Hold space, listen, validate. These simple actions can dismantle years of emotional suppression. They can create an environment where both men and women feel seen, heard, and safe. Safety is the soil where emotional expression can grow. And from that expression comes understanding. Ultimately, the emotional gap between men and women is not the result of biology. It is the result of generations of unspoken rules and inherited fears. But the good news is, what was created can be changed. We have the power to rewrite the emotional story we live in. We can raise boys who know that tears are not weakness. We can raise girls who know that anger is not shameful. We can become adults who speak the truth of what we feel without fear of losing love or respect. The journey from suppression to expression is a return to ourselves. And when we return to ourselves, we find each other. The gap begins to close not through force, not through demands, but through shared humanity, through real, honest, open emotion. That is where connection begins. And that is where change becomes lasting. In many parts of the world, the discussion around gender still revolves around superiority. Who is more powerful? Who is more capable? Who deserves more? These questions have kept men and women locked in a silent struggle, not for growth or unity, but for dominance. But life does not function through dominance. Nature thrives in balance. The sun rises and the moon follows. The ocean crashes and the shore holds it. Balance is not about one force being stronger than the other. It is about different forces complementing each other. When we understand this, we stop looking at gender as a battlefield and begin to see it as a partnership. When men are taught that their value lies in being providers, protectors, decision makers, they internalize the belief that control equals worth. When women are taught that their value lies in being nurturers, supporters, caregivers, they internalize the belief that sacrifice equals love. These are not truths. They are stories that have been repeated for so long that they feel true. And because they feel true, people live by them, even when those stories hurt them, even when those stories prevent them from becoming fully themselves. Balance in human relationships comes not from one gender winning over the other, but from mutual understanding. When a man begins to understand the emotional world of a woman, not judge it, not fear it, but truly listen, he expands. He becomes deep. When a woman begins to understand the silent burdens that men carry, not just the visible ones, but the internal pressure to be strong, to be successful, to never fail, she begins to see not a rival, but a reflection. This shift in perspective is where balance begins. We live in a time where men and women often feel like they are on opposing sides. Women are rising to claim their rights and voices after generations of suppression. Men, in turn, are often unsure of their role in this new world. Some feel blamed. Some feel lost. But this is not awards. This is an adjustment. And adjustments require understanding, not accusation. The truth is, both genders have been shaped by systems that served neither of them completely. Liberation is not just for women. Healing is not just for men. It is for both. Mutual understanding is built through presence. It begins with listening. Not listening to reply, but listening to understand. It takes humility to admit that you do not know what someone else is feeling. It takes maturity to stop defending yourself and start hearing another person's pain. This is the essence of connection. Men and women must stop seeing each other as categories and start seeing each other as human beings with fears, desires, dreams, traumas, and hopes. This level of honesty creates space for real dialogue, not just debates. One of the biggest challenges to mutual understanding is the need to be right. Often, conversations about gender turn into competitions. Who suffers more? Who works harder? Who is more misunderstood? But this competition leads nowhere. Pain is not a contest. It is an experience. Men and women both carry. The moment we start comparing pain instead of honoring it, we create more division. But when we hold space for each other's experiences without judgment, healing becomes possible. A man who understands balance does not lose his strength. He refines it. he refines it. He learns that strength is not about overpowering, but about protecting with compassion. A woman who understands balance does not lose her softness. She strengthens it with clarity and boundaries. In this way, both become more complete, not by becoming like each other, but by appreciating and respecting each other. Respect is not agreeing with everything. It is recognizing someone's worth even when they are different from you. Balance in relationships also means that tasks and responsibilities are not assigned by gender, but by agreement, ability, and support. It means understanding that both men and women can lead, both can nurture, both can guide, both can listen. The roles we take on should serve our growth, not restrict it. If one person always carries the emotional weight while the other remains silent, that is not balance. If one person makes all the decisions while the other stays passive, that is not balance. True balance is dynamic. It shifts, adjusts, and supports both people as they evolve. Culturally, we have been taught to admire independence, but in human relationships, interdependence is where strength lies. It is the understanding that we do not lose ourselves by relying on another. We become more human when we allow others in. Mutual understanding is not about agreement at all times. It is about the ability to remain connected even during disagreement. This is the kind of strength that sustains love, partnership, and progress. When we move away from the need to dominate and move toward the desire to understand, something fundamental changes. The energy shifts from control to collaboration, from fear to trust, from silence to conversation. And in that shift, we begin to heal the very gap that generations before us have widened. We stop repeating patterns. We stop raising children who think love means control or that being strong means being alone. We model a new way of relating, one based on balance, not superiority. The world we live in is fast, demanding, and often confusing. In such a world, balance becomes more than a luxury. It becomes a necessity. Without it, relationships break. Without it, communities fracture. Without it, people feel unseen and unheard. But balance is possible. It begins with each person doing the inner work of reflection, asking themselves, where have I misunderstood the opposite gender? What assumptions do I hold? Where have I projected my pain onto others instead of exploring it within? Asking these questions is not easy. It takes honesty. It takes the willingness to sit in discomfort, but from that discomfort comes clarity, and from clarity comes connection. Men who take the time to understand women's experiences, even if they never lived them, become more compassionate. Women who take the time to understand the silent expectations placed on men, even if they don't agree with them, become more grounded in empathy. This is not about agreeing on everything. It is about standing together, or despite the differences. Ultimately, mutual understanding and balance are not just about fairness. They are about potential. When men and women stop trying to win against each other and start working with each other, they unlock something powerful. They become co-creators. They build families, communities, workplaces, and societies that are more inclusive, more kind, and more effective. Not because one gender is leading, but because both are seen, valued, and heard. Balance is not something that happens once and stays forever. It is something we must choose every day in how we speak, in how we listen, in how we show up for one another. It is not a theory, it is a practice. And like any practice, it requires presence, patience, and persistence. But the result is worth it, because when men and women live in balance, they do not compete. They complete. They do not divide, they unite. They do not fight for power. They create peace. And in that peace, they become not just better for each other, but better for the world. From the moment we are born, we are given identities and names, roles, and expectations. For most, gender is the first identity imposed. A baby is called a boy or a girl, and from that point forward, Their life is often shaped more by that label than by who they truly are. This identity comes with a script. Boys are taught to behave one way, girls another. Society writes the script so deeply into our upbringing that we begin to see ourselves not as individuals, but as representatives of our gender. Over time, we forget that beneath the surface of male and female, we are simply human. The problem with building our identity entirely around gender is that it limits us. It tells men what they are allowed to feel, do, and become. It tells women the same. It creates invisible boundaries that shape our choices. A man might hide his love for poetry or tenderness because it doesn't fit the image of masculinity. A woman might downplay her ambition or strength because it challenges what femininity is expected to look like. These limitations are not natural, they are learned. And what is learned can be unlearned. To truly bridge the growing gap between men and women, we must go deeper than gender roles. We must go to the core of identity. We must ask who we are when all the labels fall away. What remains when we are not performing masculinity or femininity? What remains is something universal, a human being who wants to be loved, who wants to be seen, who wants to feel safe, free, and whole. These desires are not male or female. They are human. And when we start from that shared ground, unity becomes possible. We live in a world where gender is constantly used to divide us in politics, in religion, in culture, and family. The divisions may look different in each place, but the root is the same. And over-identification with roles and categories. When people cling too tightly to these roles, they begin to see others through narrow lenses. Men see women as emotional, unpredictable, soft. Women see men as cold, dominant, distant. These are not truths. They are stereotypes. But when repeated often enough, they become walls. The journey to unity requires letting go of the need to define ourselves solely by gender. This does not mean ignoring the real experiences of men and women. It means holding those experiences with care while remembering they are only part of the picture. When identity transcends gender, we begin to experience others not as types, but as people. A woman becomes more than a symbol of motherhood or beauty. A man becomes more than a provider or protector. They become complex, evolving, alive. This shift begins with awareness. We must begin to notice how often we label ourselves and others based on gender, how often we make assumptions, how often we say men are like this or women always do that. These statements are easy to make, but they flatten reality. They erase individuality, and they stop true connection from forming. Real unity starts when we stop talking about each other as categories and start speaking to each other as equals. When we transcend gender in our identity, we also begin to approach conflict differently. Instead of seeing disagreement through the lens of male versus female, we see it as two humans with different perspectives. This reduces defensiveness. It increases empathy. It allows us to listen not for the purpose of winning, but for the purpose of understanding. We stop asking, who's right? And start asking what's true for you. That is how bridges are built. Many people fear that letting go of gender-based identity means losing something. But in truth, it means gaining something much greater. We gain the freedom to express ourselves more fully. A man who is free from the pressure of always being strong can ask for help, cry, and rest. A woman who is free from the pressure of always being agreeable can say no, take space, and speak powerfully. In this freedom, both become more authentic. And in authenticity, there is connection. The need to defend gender identity often comes from pain. Many women have been oppressed, ignored, underestimated. Many men have been shamed, isolated, misunderstood. These wounds are real and they need to be honored. But healing does not come from clinging to wounded identities. It comes from recognizing that we are not our pain. We are not our past. We are not the roles that were forced upon us. We are something much deeper, something whole before the world taught us to divide. In spaces where gender identity is too rigid, people suffer silently. A man who feels deeply may suppress that feeling because his community equates emotion with weakness. A woman who is naturally assertive may hide her leadership because she fears being labeled aggressive. These internal sacrifices lead to external disconnection. People show up half alive pretending to be what they think they must be. But pretending is exhausting, and exhaustion erodes intimacy. Transcending gender identity doesn't mean becoming neutral or the same. It means being free. Free to explore the full range of who we are without being told that this is for men or that is for women. It means recognizing that courage is not masculine and care is not feminine. That sensitivity is not weakness and strength is not domination. These are human qualities, and all of us deserve access to them. In relationships, this shift can be transformative. When two people meet as humans first, not as gender roles, they open space for true partnership. They are not trying to live out a script. They are not assigning each other tasks based on tradition. They are co-creating a life based on respect, communication, and mutual growth. In such a relationship, differences are not threats. They are gifts. And from that foundation, deep trust is built. In society, when we stop measuring people by their gender and start valuing them for their character, everything changes. Workplaces become more inclusive. Education becomes more empowering. Laws become more just. Conversations become more real. We stop asking, is this a man's job or a woman's role? And we start asking, who is best for this based on ability, passion, and purpose? That is the world unity builds, a world where humanity matters more than labels. This journey is not about erasing gender, but about expanding identity beyond. It is about knowing that while we may be shaped by gender, we are not defined by it. We are sons and daughters, but also souls. We are husbands and wives, but also creators, thinkers, dreamers, and seekers. When we honor this deeper identity, we begin to relate to one another not with fear, but with curiosity, not with control, but with compassion. The gap between men and women will continue to grow if we keep clinging to the old definitions of who we are supposed to be. But that gap can shrink slowly, honestly, deeply, if we begin to remember who we truly are beneath the surface, not enemies, not opposites, not strangers, but mirrors, reflections of the same source, carriers of the same spark, parts of the same fire, not to erase difference, but to deepen connection, not to eliminate identity, but to expand it, not to win a war, but to end one. Unity begins not when we fight to be right, but when we choose to be real. And being real means being human together.